Hello, this is Wolfgar, and today I'm going to talk about Stephen King's Lisey's Story. Lisey's Story is a 513-page novel released in 2006 that I read on Kindle. It was Stephen King's 54th released book, and I read it in a total of 6 days. So the book starts off a little slow and a little convoluted. It took me a while to really place myself in where we were at, who the characters were, and what we were trying to achieve. It didn't help that during this time, we also quickly got introduced to a lot of what I thought of as baby words. Words like bool, bad gunky, smucking. There was a lot of words that were used to replace curse words that came up quite a bit throughout the book. So these kind of baby words, as you're trying to struggle to kind of set yourself in place, didn't really help. The story takes place in the present of the titular character of Lisey, and through flashbacks we start learning about her life with her husband Scott Langdon. We get a little bit of the goods, we get some of the tragic things that happen in their time together, and we also get a little bit of her life with her sisters and how they affect her, and they come into play later on in the story. Along with her family, we also get some scenes that kind of start looking at self-harm as well as mental illness. And I don't know that those were necessarily handled very well, so I'm glad that that they kind of stayed away a little bit from going too hard into those. As we get into the book, it moves away from being pure reality to starting to drift into the supernatural. We start getting some scenes from Scott's childhood, where we're dealing with different powers and different supernatural influences that come into play, and that then later on in his life, once he becomes a writer, becomes popular, start playing a little bit of a role in his life and their marriage. So overall, I have to say I was a little bit disappointed with this book. The characters just did not do it for me. They were kind of all over the place. Lisey in particular just felt like your standard King protagonist. It felt like he wrote the character just like he would have any of his male protagonists, using the same dialogue, the same language, same everything. And it just didn't feel right. It didn't seem to suit the character. It just kind of felt a little bit false. And the side characters were really bad, really poorly developed for the most part. Especially the bad characters that were introduced later on in the book. Nothing about the characters in this book really spoke to me or made me really interested in them at all. Which is why it kind of surprised me that I found myself just really chugging through this book and constantly looking for time to spend continuing on. I think this says something about how good King is at kind of the flow, the kind of the cadence of writing, the kind of the rhythm, the musicality of the written word, where you just kind of are just going so along with the beat that even if there are some discordant notes in there, or some things where you wish that a different choice would have been made, you just keep going. You just keep going through it. One of the other odd things about this book is that I thought that clearly the best portion for me happened in the final chapter, which, even though it's listed as a chapter, is really almost like an epilogue, where the story itself is over at the end of the second part. All of the main plot points have been wrapped up, where we could close right there and be done, but instead there are some moments that we kind of get hinted at in the book up to that point. Things about his Scott Langdon's childhood that seem kind of interesting that we finally get to read about. Again, these aren't really needed. These could have easily been reworked slightly and been created as a short story for one of his short story compilations, and the book been left as is. But as it was, they did include this to kind of give a little bit more closure to Lisey at the end as she's kind of wrapping up all of their affairs together. But this part where we're learning again more about his childhood and his father and his brother, this stuff was actually kind of scary. It really kind of gets kind of in your bones a little bit with how gritty it is. And was really interesting. So I'm glad that we did get it in one shape or another. So having it there at the end did add a little bit, even if it wasn't really needed for the novel itself. But it was kind of a nice cherry on the top at the end. In the end, I'm going to say I was very close to going down to 2 of 5 stars on this one, which is pretty rare for me with a King book. Pretty much most King is in the 3 to 4 stars out of 5, with maybe a handful to a dozen up at the 5-star area. Very few below that. Some of the short stories definitely down in the 1 to 2s. However, most of them again in the 3 to 4s. This one again, because of the lack of interest in the characters, the baby talk, stuff like that, got me very close to giving it 2 of 5 stars. But again, because of the rhythm, the cadence, the way that I just drove to want to read it and finish it, and then along with the really interesting parts at the end, got me to bump it up to 3 of 5 stars. So I'd say it's on the lower end of 3, but I feel pretty comfortable about placing it there in the 3 stars. So again, this was Lisey's Story by Stephen King. Next up will be Children of Blood and Bone by Tomi Adeyemi. So I've been really excited to get a chance to read that. Maybe that's one of the reasons why I blew through this one so quickly, is because I was really interested to get started on this next book. So I imagine in another few days we'll have another one of these. So thanks, and hopefully I'll see you again.